ridiculous. Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the institution that began when the pandemic did. It was meant to help authors like me whose tours were canceled, readers who couldn't get into bookstores because their doors were shuttered, and just about anybody who has anything to do with books. I'm really excited today because I just read this book, The Evening Hero by Myung-OK, which literally is one of my favorite books of the year. It's just absolutely magnificent. It's about immigration. It's about North Korea. It's about a character approaching the end of his life, the evening of his life, but it turns out to be something else. So let me tell you a little bit about Marie first. She's an acclaimed Korean-American writer, the author of the novels Somebody's Daughter, Saying Goodbye, Finding My Voice, Necessary Roughness, F is for Fabuloso, and more. She was a writer in residence at Brown University, where she graduated, and she's teaching at Columbia University's writing division. Her stories and essays have been published, and I just want to say I put a link in the chat so everybody can go to her website and read the essays. They're amazing. So her stories and essays have been published in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Slate, Salon, Guernica, The Guardian, and many others. She was the first Fulbright scholar to Korea for creative writing, and she's received many honors for her work, including an O. Henry Honorable Mention, the Best Book Award from the Friends of American Writers, and a Rhode Island State Council on the Arts Fiction Fellowship. She's a current New York Foundation of the Arts Fiction Fellow. She's also been a Yaddo and MacDowell Colony Fellow and has served as a judge for the National Book Award and the Penn Wilson Literary Science Writing Award. In addition, she's a founder of this great organization, the Asian American Writers Workshop. She was an R-word writer in residence for the Columbia MFA program, and Good Morning America selected The Evening Hero as a buzz pick for their book club. But wait, there's more. The Evening Hero has spectacular reviews, as it should. The Star Tribune calls it a sweeping novel and says that Lee writes with heart, humor, and authentic detail and shows how the most outwardly unassuming people can harbor epic histories. I find it an absolutely beautiful and correct blurb for this book. The New York Times called it soulful, melodic, rhapsodic. Isn't that great? So, The Evening Hero is a story of Dr. Jungmann Kwok. At one time, a leading obstetrician, but when the hospital, and an American immigrant from Korea, but when his hospital closes, his world just becomes devastated. He feels he's losing value in himself and in his community, but it's not just the present that's consuming him. He begins to reveal a devastating family history in North Korea before the war, even as a secret threatens to derail his life. So, Marie, thank you so much for being here to talk about your absolutely amazing book. I'm thrilled to have you here. I can't wait to hear what you're going to say.
I'm so thrilled to be here. And thank you for your work, especially, I don't know how you keep writing all these books and doing wonderful things to the community like that.
It's anxiety. It's probably anxiety. So before I ask my first question, I want to tell everybody out there, please go to bookshop.org or your favorite indie to order Marie's books. This new one, The Evening Hero, and all of her other books. Also, if you have a comment, don't be shy. Put it in the chat. Okay, so there's so much going on in The Evening Hero. It's both an exploration of the American dream from a Korean immigrant's point of view. It also chronicles the appalling devastation done to the Koreans during and after the war at the hands of Americans. It's also about America's horrific healthcare system. It's about the horrifying racism that people don't even realize. I mean, there was one point where one character calls the protagonist Dr. Quack. And it's done so casually that somehow, and like this is normal and okay, that it makes the racism worse. The book is also about how the past is prologue to the future. So I always want to know how all these different myriad forces came together to create this amazing, astounding book. What was the impetus for the book? Was there something that you were just obsessing about that made you write this, or did it come naturally, or did the character reveal it?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because this novel took me 18 years to write.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I wrote a couple other novels that were not the right one, because the impetus was, so our son is disabled and he's always having these doctor's appointments. And when he was having a doctor's appointment, I was chatting with a guy, and I don't know why he was telling me this story about his colleague who was an OBGYN who saved a woman who needed, whose pregnancy was bleeding out, but he had to get her hysterectomy, which is what you normally do. And then he ended up getting sued because she was young and he like lots of fertility. And it just made me think, like, what if the doctor was Asian? And like there would be all this other stuff in play, like he's Asian butcher, Asians don't like value life, as we heard in the Vietnam War, so forth. So I got that idea to do like a malpractice thing. So I did all this research. I saw these malpractice cases. You know, I was doing all this research in Korea. So, and that was actually all about Young-man's son, Einstein, who is like
Einstein,
great, like a secondary character, but he was actually the main character, and the book was literally sort of more inspired by Middlemarch, because if you know the doctor who wants to do the right thing and he accidentally kills a guy, and then his wife is like kind of spendthrift. It's just like, and you know, it's about small village life, and so I was trying to meld these two. And, you know, a lot of it was about like the futurism in medicine. They wanted to make it funny. And I'm from Minnesota, so I had to set at the Mall of America about the mallification of medicine. And then it kind of, you know, was going okay. And we sold the novel. But when it was 2016 in the election, I just felt like it was a lot more satirical. I felt like satire's gone out the window, man. Jimmy, because you need excess for satire. We already had way too much excess. And I just also felt, this seems really goofy, but, you know, you mentioned like I was one of the founders of the Asian American Writers Workshop. And one of the reasons like we founded it is we kind of felt that was the time when the only Asian American book that ever knew was the Joy Luck Club. And that became its own kind of, this is Asian American literature. You read with your grandma about immigration. And so I felt like I want to do something that's not that. I want to do like this big social novel, blah, blah, blah. But then what was happening is Young-man's voice after 2016 was starting to take over. He was actually just like the mortar between Einstein's story. But then it made me realize sort of the other impetus was so I am from a small town in Minnesota, and, you know, I'm still like friends with a lot of people that I grew up with, and most people still are there. And I'm on our town Facebook group. When Trump was getting let's bomb North Korea, somebody posted their bumper sticker that they were so proud of that said, every day, 52 species of animal go extinct. North Koreans need to be next. And I just felt like, you know what? You know, my dad was the town doctor who was Korean, and he's from North Korea, like Young-man. And I just felt like, you're really going to say this after, you know, my dad wasn't an OBGYN, but he was the anesthesiologist, which is probably even more touching every single person in town. So it just became more me being, well, I'm gonna have to write this immigrant novel that I didn't want to write. But that, you know how, you know, you has this happened to you where the story or the characters tell you what it should be?
Yeah.
You want someone else gets the wheel.
Yeah, and sometimes what you don't want to write, that you keep erasing and deleting, comes back because it's what you should write.
Right, exactly.
I think, you know, I've listened to this amazing interview with you where you mentioned that while The Evening Hero isn't biographical, it does share details with your own story. So where did fact and fiction merge? And did you live in a town called, hilariously, Horse's Breath?
I did not, but there are a lot of like very weird town names. Actually, like Sinclair Lewis is from a town called Sleepy Eye. So also Sinclair Lewis was a big inspiration for this book. So I felt like I had to name it something strange. My town is called Hibbing, which is named after the guy who found it, even though there were Native Americans living there. And so Young-man is of a different generation. So my parents were of age during the Korean War, and Young-man is still just a child. So he has a different experience of it, but a lot of the things that happen, like with being displaced from one place, from North Korea to South Korea, and then being displaced again, coming to the US, these are a lot of things that I could draw on emotionally and so forth. But then in terms of I think one of the best pieces I wrote about my dad, I wrote this piece in 2012. If you can remember, the election cycle was so different. It was called Mitt Romney's Muffin Tops and My Asian Dad. And it was kind of a satire, but it was about how the Republicans shouldn't take Asians for granted just because people like my father are so conservative because they feel like that's patriotic to be, Republican. But I talked a lot about like how he almost starved during the Korean War. And so how he never lets us waste anything. And he was always, I don't know, eating spoiled food and everything. So unlike Youngman, my father was like deeply Christian, very much into the American dream, sort of that the guy in the Mitt Romney piece. He's very much like, I want to, like, people should never burn the flag. It's the American flag. Where Youngman is always questioning things. He thinks Christianity is really dumb, like eating the blood of Christ or whatever. What's that all about? So they're very different personalities. But a lot of the historical stuff was helpful because it would help me figure out, like, for instance, at one point there's a I needed a crematorium as a plot point, but I knew that Koreans don't cremate their bodies. But then kind of like through these networks, actually, I found someone who said, no, actually, there was a crematorium in Busan at the time. But I wanted to make it really historically accurate because it's not like I'm making accusations against the US. This stuff really happened, but I wanted to make sure people knew that I did the research and that I'm not making this up. Like, it was actually 10 times more horrible than what is portrayed. But I didn't
heard that.
Yeah, I don't.
I've heard that.
The point of the book, it's almost too gross. Do you understand?
It's funny. Yeah, we had somebody on here a while ago who wrote a book about the Korean War, who said the exact same thing, that the devastation was so much more than anything you could imagine, and for some reason, people don't talk about it.
North Korea was bombed to 99% of its infrastructure, but South Korea was bombed to like 92%. So if some other country came and bombed that much, you would kind of be like, wow, this country's really nuts. The American generals were just aghast to see that the Allies did this to a country. And it was also a country like as Koreans, we didn't have any prettier side. We were just coming off the colonization. Koreans just wanted to be Koreans again.
Yeah. It's so strange. It's like, because you never really get the true story. I remember my father talking about the Korean War, and it was just like, it's war. It's a war. It's not an important war. Yet, when you read about all this stuff, it was a crucially important war and terrible war for the people involved. I wanted to know, because we talked a little bit about this before we got on here. There's a photo of you on your website, and I urge everybody to go to the website because there's such a wealth of amazing essays and information there of you standing with a North Korean female soldier, and you're smiling, and she's not smiling. And I just was so curious because there's been some documentaries in North Korea, which are obviously very curated. How did you get to go there? You were one of the few journalists who got there. How did you get to go there? What was it like? What surprised you?
Besides everything, yeah. And also, Korean Americans are not allowed to go to North Korea because, among other things, the fact that diaspora Koreans exist kind of gives lie to the North Korean mantra that this is the best place on earth. No one else, So it was actually this huge fluke because I knew I had to go there. I don't know. I always had these like weird, like, I knew I had to somehow get into an operating room to see a C-section, and I managed to do that. And I felt like I had to get into North Korea. And then weirdly, there were a couple like aborted attempts. And then some students at Brown had found a fixer when I was teaching there that would take them. They were all Chinese language students. They were going to, the fixer was going to take them from China into North Ended And then they needed 2 faculty to come with them. So of course I volunteered right away. But then it ended up the other guy who was this white guy who taught Japanese history. He dropped out because he got too scared because that's when they were doing all the missile testing. And I will also say the State Department told us not to go. So it was a little, but I felt like this is my one chance. I have to go. And the wonderful thing is that when they asked, they could tell from my name that I was Korean. And then they were like, we need the Chinese characters. They could see my family was. And this has happened to my father a couple of times where he had gone over with some missionaries to bring medical equipment. And for some reason, he always got stranded in Beijing and everyone else went a lot. And they never said why he didn't get his visa. And I was like, I'm not going to let this happen to me. And the students, they were so clever because I was like, what should I do? Like, should I write it down? And they said, no. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to tell them that you're traveling and that if you want the whole group to go, our academic group, it's American Ivy League group coming to North Korea, like you'll have to just shove her on there. And that's at the last minute what they did. So I just got in on a group visa. I didn't have my name on it. It was like the Brown University group. So that was like the first hurdle. And then
Wow.
I know the whole trip was crazy because that was also when the two journalists got kidnapped, but it was good for us actually because Clinton had just been there rescuing them. So they were all happy. And so they just took us around for 5 days. And then like the soldierly, there was military all around. And the weird thing is, so this woman was really interesting to talk to. Her English was excellent. Apparently it seems like they're not allowed to smile. They're supposed to be really, maybe it's like the Buckingham Palace.
Wow.
Or something. So she was like super formal all the time, but some of it was like, they were very warm as long as we didn't do anything wrong. And at one point, they told us we couldn't take any unauthorized pictures. So it was basically going to this statue, take picture. So we're sitting in the bus one day, completely bored, in the middle of the country, like nothing around, where like this kept happening, like they would just stop. And, I saw this bicycle when I'm on the bus that's like leaning against a tree. I was like, this would make a great picture. Should I take a secret picture? And I'm like, nah, maybe not. And then the next thing I hear is like, somebody took a picture. And out of nowhere, all this military just swarmed on the bus.
Oh my God.
I was like, wait, did they like read my mind? It was me. And they ended up dragging this young brown student off the bus with the guide who was like crying because the guide is also like responsible for anything stupid that we do. They're gone for hours. We were going like, oh my God, what's happening? Like, what's going to happen? She comes back. She's completely crying and devastated. But because she was a Chinese national, they just like messed up her camera and took all the film out of it. They didn't like incarcerate her or us.
Oh my God.
But yeah, so for the rest of the tour, we were completely like, oh my God. If like, if someone else, if that had been me, what would have happened to that guy out of Warm Beer? Do you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Like that 10 seconds where I was like, nah, like we had nothing out there. I don't understand how anyone saw anything.
God, were you afraid that they weren't going to let you go back to America at all?
Yeah.
Did you be arrested? Really? Oh my God.
They were screaming that this was a secret military installation and someone had taken a picture and la, la, la. Yeah. So I really feel like because this woman was like a Chinese national and, she had a Chinese passport. And then the other like fun thing was just that, and this makes it into the book a little bit, and it made me feel kind of bad. Like I'm not a big eater, but they tried to really fed us with like all these banquets. But the sad thing was there was no Korean food. It was all this really weird mayonnaise-y, fried American like pork chop food, and then they pile it on. Yeah, and occasionally I'd see the guide eating like some doenjang jjigae. I just think, oh my God, I want that so bad. And so it was just like this very bizarre, because also, as I mentioned, it was bombed to 99% of like all the infrastructure. And it was just rebuilt as this weird Stalinist Disneyland.
Oh my
God. I have no idea. You know what I'm saying? Like it didn't resonate for me necessarily as Korea. It was just like this very weird Stalinist state where everything was very staged. People walking around. You didn't see any, at least in Pyongyang, I didn't see disabled people. You didn't see any like really, really elderly people. Everyone was just the subway was
Did you have the feeling that any moment somebody would come up to you and want you to save them or take them out of the country?
We were told we were not allowed to talk to anybody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
wow.
At one point too, this does make it into the book where they were like, oh, we're going to take a souvenir video. Like we're going to video every single thing. So this guy was videotaping everything. And at one point, he was like, oh, he doesn't speak English, don't worry, blah, blah. Somebody told a joke and he just started laughing. And so there was so much surveillance or like, I had fingerprints on my glasses. This other person he had to run back to his hotel room because he forgot something. And they were actually in his room with like surveillance. because
it's extraordinary.
was
These stories are extraordinary.
somebody
Oh
got
my
jailed
God.
because they accidentally put a cigarette out on Kim Jong-il's face because it was like on a newspaper. Just, you know what I'm saying? Like, you just didn't know like how you could like fuck it up. Because that's
Oh,
not what you're used to. So in a weird way, the poor
right.
guy Otto Warmbier who died, like, yeah, it was a prank and he shouldn't have done that. And pretty clearly that was a dumb thing that he did. But at the same time, the standards of everything are, you know what I mean? Like, you can't talk to somebody. Well, are they really saying that? Do you know what I mean? Or they're like, you can't bring any Bibles or porn. And there is actually one of my friend's ministers is still in North Korea for bringing a Bible in. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it was hard to, so some of it was so comical. You didn't know what you
It
could
is.
do.
It is comical at the same time. It's appalling. I mean, there were also places in your novel where, I would laugh and then I would bring myself up and say, is this really funny? It's not funny for the people living through this. I mean, because it was so much of the stuff is so weird.
Well,
I have a writer
there. The humor is next to the grimness.
That's amazing. I think you captured that so well in the novel because it's so very interesting because so much of the novel is about, the American dream and this poor obstetrician who, he was one of the best obstetricians and now he's reduced to working in a mall, removing hair from people's bodies. And I mean, it's like, it's funny, but it's not funny. It's kind of like you feel his shame and his sorrow. And at the same time, you're thinking, how can this be? How can this be? So I have a writer's question for you. I love talking about structure, and I really love the structure of The Evening Hero, which was done in 5 sections, some in rural Minnesota, which was hilarious. Some in war-torn Korea, which wasn't hilarious. And later in the book, in the relief organizations, and there was also a section with Youngman's wife. Did you always know this was going to be the structure, or did the characters dictate that structure to you?
Oh, that's such a great question, especially because if there are people who are sort of aspiring writers or writers, because the whole thing about being edited is always so difficult, and how to tell a story is so, it's sometimes it's like the hardest part. And for me, I specifically wanted to do a more Asian story structure versus the sort of Aristotelian inciting incident, rising action, climax, denouement. The Asian is much more circular, and there's some circular like themes throughout there. And I wanted to do 5 in particular because 5 is symmetrical in that there's 1 and there's 2 on both sides. So that's about, in a book form, about as linear, as like circular as I could get. And then also in Asian storytelling, often it's not always action that gives movement. It is often proximity. So you can see it's not like this happens and then we go flashback to this. Like, the books aren't really, they almost seem like, wait, how? Some of them are actually further behind, like further in the story.
But they're stitched all together in a beautiful way.
I hope.
Yeah.
That's what I hope it, because I also feel like immigrant memory is like that, because the young man has all the stuff he's trying to forget, and he's coming back to him, and they're trying to be able to express that. So I appreciate that question that you caught on to that.
You are welcome. So much of this book is about how immigrants manage or they don't manage. I love the whole stuff with Kwok's son Einstein, and especially Einstein's wife, who, even if she pronounces the word kimchi, she pronounces it in a kind of sneer. She doesn't want their son to speak any Korean. And it's kind of like the American dream for Kwok is in a dying city that's bitterly cold, and his one friend is this internist Ken, who's like just about the only person who can say his name right. So what does that say to people and to you about the American dream? I mean, is it kind of a crock?
I think it's 100% a crock, actually, in that, I feel like immigrants are hard workers. That's not something to be contested. But But what I would
Right.
say, for instance, my father was a big aficionado. If I let my father stand in for young man, he was a big aficionado of these Horatio Alger stories. You work hard, no matter what, you can whatever. And then recently I did some research on Horatio Alger, and it turned out he was this big hack who would write hundreds of stories, kind of like Dickens. And then these weird immigration ones were the ones that were the most popular and that people like to hear. And also it would be like this dirty urchin gets cleaned up and more whitened,
Right.
and they assimilate, And then, so I think what the reality is, I think young man, probably a lot less than my father, because my father's a big believer in the American dream. I think young man is constantly questioning, why do I have to work so hard? Why is it like this? Why is it I've given 40 years of my life to this job, and now I am depilating, pubic hair at the Mall of America, and I'm getting $10 an hour. On the other hand, I kind of like it. And then I don't have anything else to do with my life. And wait, is this capitalism?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And especially in American society now, it seems to be getting worse for anybody who is not white, Christian, and male. So that on top of it makes things even more difficult. So I want to ask you about, there's a statement in the book. Oh no, it looks like you froze. Are you there?
Yes.
Oh, you are. Okay, great. It's just your image is frozen. Good, I can blather on. There was a wonderful statement in the book that says, there is always meaning for those who look for it, which I think really much applies to your protagonist, because he does find meaning at the end of the book. And it's so moving and so wonderful. Can you talk about that a little bit, like how he came to that? Because there's a secret that he doesn't want to address at first, but then he does. And that actually helps to lead him to find meaning.
I think this kind of thing happens to a lot of us, where we know what the right thing is to do, but we'll just go to sleep and tomorrow will come. And we just know what the right thing is to do. So young man's getting these letters, and there's one right thing for him to do. However, he's at the end of his life. It could be just as easy for him to just live his life and not, make amends or whatever people want to do when they know that something has gone unfinished in their life. And then he has, as a young man, he kind of, slightly less than his wife, wanted to do something good, like missionary. So he's kind of signing up for Doctors Without Borders, but he doesn't really, that's not quite it. He is really just like reaching for meaning. What do I do with the rest of my life? Look, I've been canned, but I still have tons of, usefulness left. And if I just die, like what was the meaning of my life? But then at the end, he just realized he has had meaning this entire time. And he has also not given himself as much credit as he should have. And his wife is the one, he keeps thinking his wife hates him and so forth. But, that he's kind of like, but she has stayed around. And then he's realizing that how important he has been to her. And he has kept this huge promise to her. And that he too can be a hero, even though he just feels like this jerk that everyone's making fun of all the time. So some of it has to do with what can you do? And you can always do something. It's never
I loved it, and I loved his relationship with his wife. She was kind of a pisser. She was great, and he does realize that. I want to ask you. It said on your website you're writing this novel now, Hurt You, about a Korean American teenager who fights to protect both her neurodivergent older brother and herself from a hostile environment. And of course, it's set in the most hostile environment of all, a suburban high school. So, you've written about your own son compellingly. And I was wondering two things. First, how did that and your own life factor into this story? And also, how did your son get a license for cannabis?
Okay, let's see. I'll have to really distill this. So my son has autism, and he has been diagnosed as being profoundly mentally retarded as well. And he has not been able to communicate functionally. He often gets aggressive when he's frustrated, and he is now 23, and he's much larger than I am. And we have had several encounters, besides the fact, when he's out, he does a lot of repetitive motions and things, and people are always kind of looking at him and being scared of him. But again, I will say he has been aggressive before. But we have also had incidents where people have called the police on us when he's being aggressive towards me, or just being aggressive. Even when I tell people like not to, we were at Whole Foods once, and he was having tantrum, mentioned getting in the car, and someone called the police, and the police came.
I remember that.
He was little then, at least. And then what had happened in the interim is there was a case in California. So it also got me thinking about guns, because this man was a grown man in his 30s, was in the Costco with his elderly parents, and he jostled someone, I think, getting some samples. The guy he jostled was an LAPD officer who immediately, within 80 seconds, shot him and his parents as they tried to intervene and tell him what was wrong with him. And so I was doing all this statistical research to see that even though people are very scared of people with intellectual disabilities, they have a much higher chance of being killed by the police or in violence than neurotypical people. So that was just kind of been boiling inside me, because we have, even in the interim, had more police encounters. Luckily, they've never gone violent. But the other day, I actually had to push. I didn't mean to. I pushed this guy away from Jay because I just didn't want him to touch him. And so I ended up like melding it with Of Mice and Men, because that was a story I felt, well, among other things, not that it didn't have a happy ending. It was more that it told the truth about some things in life, about violence, about difference, about gender. And then I thought it would actually, the more I was like thinking of that story, and that's another story that I've been reading to my son. I read to him every night, like age appropriate stuff. And I was thinking of that. I was like, that'd be super funny. Instead of the bunkhouse, we'd have a Korean hagwon, like the cram school where all the stuff goes on. And what if instead of George and Lenny, it's Lenny and Georgia, his sister? Because I also don't feel like it's my place to write from the point of view of the autistic person. In the book, the person has an unnamed disorder, but I did interview a lot of siblings, and to see how, to just get a lot of background. And so that's how I decided to do that. And that was just a project where that book, even here it took 18 years. This took like maybe 2 years, because it was just to me, it was such a project that was important to me. And then in the interim, as you probably know, my son had this amazing Oliver Sacks type breakthrough that we've been working on for ages, but always, as a mom, always have hope. But who would ever think, like, someone who had an IQ of 40, he can now talk by pointing to letters. We just made like this letter board, and he can point to these letters if we steady his hand enough that he can point to them. So what was really cute is he was able to kind of read the book, and he did give it his seal of approval. And then when it came time to pick the audio narrator, so normally, they, how they give you like a bunch of like auditions of actors.
Right.
And so they gave me 5, and I picked this one. And I was like, this girl is totally Georgia, because she's the one telling the story. But I said, Jay, all right, who do you think it should be? And he picked someone totally different.
Wow, that's interesting.
And what he said is, this person's voice is much clearer and seems to embody the story better.
Wow.
And I'm getting so many compliments on the audiobook.
That's great. That's great.
Isn't that funny?
It's really, really funny, and it's great. So I also wanted to mention that you and your son co-authored a piece in the next Teen Vogue. That's incredible too. Was that fun? Will you do more like that with him?
Oh, definitely. It's very fun to like co-write with him, and he's always wanted to be a writer, and he's been practicing all these years while he's been inside, and nobody's been thinking he's been inside. So the stuff already comes out very nicely.
I have to ask you, you worked at Goldman Sachs. What was it like being a woman there and being Korean American? Was it what I imagined it to be?
I think if you imagine that, for instance, out of the 200 people in my department, I was the only other person of color besides this Asian guy who got sacked. Like, even the cleaning ladies were white. That's Goldman Sachs. Yeah. And it was just, but what's interesting, I was thinking of that today because I was having lunch with my agent, my editor, that the news about private equity, and that's also another reason why I felt like the book, I can write about private equity and things like consolidation in healthcare. This firm that bought Simon & Schuster, Colbert Kravitz Roberts, was not only this crazy like firm when I was working there, like they were known as being really predatory, but then also I was telling them what's weird of publishing is when I was working, like, with things with mergers and acquisitions, they would have never let there be like 4 publishers now. I mean, that's why that trial was so crazy. So, do you know what I'm saying? And then
it's really crazy,
right? Like, so
yeah,
it's almost
it's
like
really insane.
It's very unsettling. KKR, for instance, just, not unlike the book, just bought a chain of nursing homes and homes for the disabled, and now people are dying because they're cutting costs. You're saying, like, it's so close to the book. And then it's just, but then apparently people are saying, well, it's better that they bought them because the other alternatives would have been worse. But I'm kind of like, I'm trying, I thought I like to leave. I always had work there because I could either get my MFA or I could work there, make a shit ton of money, and have a sustainable career, because you can't just become a writer, obviously, and it takes me 20 years to write a book.
Right.
So for me, it's worked out, but I always felt like this was this horrible part of my life where I had to do it to get past it. But now I'm realizing what's weird, even with this like consolidation, it's like, whoa, my worlds are just coming together now again. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no way I can't be complicit in the stuff that I thought I was leaving behind. Or, or just even understanding one of the things about the healthcare part that was just that being at Goldman, like, really like helped me see was that we had this crazy healthcare plan where I actually made money when I went to the dentist. I'd never heard of anything like, yes, I would get a big check back. Somehow when he filed it, there's still money left over. They had an in-house clinic. If you ever needed vaccines, they did all your mold checks at your office. And then, when I'm working at a university, I'm like, what is this copay? Wait, we have to pay premiums?
Yep.
Wait, I don't get this. Oh,
I know. Healthcare is.
I still don't get dental or eyes. So I don't.
No, they don't.
Having a profit, and I can't go to the stock exchange if I want to get a gamma globulin infusion. Like, I wouldn't have known about this weird world, this parallel world where people can get the healthcare they want. And then if
you have the money and the power, you can. Yeah, I always say that I'm always glad that I had a stint working in a corporation, because you really learn how different people operate and how
everybody
think. And it's
should have a job like that.
Everybody should have a job like that, at least for a while. We have an audience question. Yay. Okay, hold on. I'm going to put it up. What writing advice would you give to your younger self? And I would like to also add, what's the worst writing advice you've ever been given?
Oh, that's such a great question too. Okay. What writing advice would I give to my younger self? You know what? I would just say I should have enjoyed it more when I was doing it.
Oh, you didn't enjoy it? Why not?
It's not that I didn't enjoy it. It was just like, I was always like, am I ever going to get published? Is this going to work? I would have done it anyways, but I think so much of it was the hustle, and then just feeling like I had to hustle and not enjoying the process as much. Even like with this book, for a while, I was like, ugh, I'm lost. It's too big. I'm just going to give up. Like, this happened a couple of times, but this time I was smarter. I wrote a note to myself. It said, enjoy this. You will miss this one day. And it is totally true. So I think that's what I would say is your life is still passing while you're working.
Right. That's exactly right.
You need to enjoy it. And that, unfortunately, that's not like practical tips. That's not practical tips. But to your point, what's the worst writing advice has definitely been write what you know.
Oh, I know, that's terrible.
It's not the worst. I feel like Grace Bailey's like, write what you don't know, or write about what you don't know about what you do know, is kind of like writing about what you know is boring.
It's boring. The most fascinating thing about writing a book to me is research. Talking to people who do something different that I don't know about.
And then while you're writing, weird things happen.
Exactly. We have another audience question. Let me get it up now. Okay. What's your writing practice like?
Oh, so this is definitely going back to my Goldman Sachs days. Well, because working at an investment bank means you have to be at work, I think it's 7 for what's called morning call, and like when the stock market opens. So every morning I would get up at 4 or 4:30 so I could get an hour writing in. Then I would go jogging so I could do some self-care around the reservoir, come home, 45-minute ride to Wall Street. And I just did that every single day. because I wanted to be a writer. This is like the only time the only other time I'd ever have like free. I once took all my vacation, like went to Bread Loaf. I took all my vacation time to go to Bread Loaf. But the thing that was been really helpful is people also ask me like, well, how has it been like being a mom of a kid who's super disabled and blah, blah. Hey, I get up at 4:30 for an hour at least. I have that time. I'm the kind of person, I don't know if you are, if I'm going to be disturbed, I can't even start. Some people are good at like, I'll write for 15 minutes. Like if I'm writing and somebody disturbs me, I'll start screaming. So like I just get too into it. So I have to know I have a whole hour. And it turns out 4:30, no one's going to call me at 4:30. So that's basically, I write from 4:30 to 5:30 when I'm working every day. And then whatever else I can get. And now, ironically, I love going to writers' residencies, these places where they feed you. I think Caroline mentioned like Yaddo and McDowell, they feed you, they treat you like a professional, which is probably the more important part. They treat what you're doing as professional. I love going to these. When I was younger, I did not have the chops to get in. So ironically, I haven't been able to get into them until recently have been more professional, but then I will say it's been a lifesaver for me because having a child at home who takes up so much of my psychic space, being physically separated, and often they would give me extra money for childcare, so I wouldn't even feel guilty. That's a very important part of my writing practice, is being able to go away and just physically isolate myself.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Okay, we have another question. Put it up. Do you read fiction when you're writing fiction? That's a good question.
That is a good question.
I can remember in college reading D.H. Lawrence, and then I would sit down to write, and suddenly I was writing like D.H. Lawrence. So I didn't read him when I was writing. But do you read fiction when you're writing fiction, or?
Yeah, I think I just never stop. I know some people feel like they would like get overly influenced. But no, I don't. I think if there was something kind of close to my book, actually there was something that Gary Steingart wrote that was kind of futuristic. I think it was Super Happy True Love Story or something that I know I avoided and read it only after I was done with this book. Because I felt like it might be really similar. I think it was. But just in general, nah. I've got like 10 books, and actually this is really messy. If you look behind there's like piles of books. It's like, I'm always reading, definitely.
So I have one more question, which is actually a question of mine that I ask everybody because I am an obsessive person myself. What's obsessing you right now and why?
Oh boy. You know what's obsessing me just in general is I don't understand how anyone's going to write anything now that's not like apocalyptic climate fiction. It's obsessing me because I'm still not working on anything, and when I'm thinking about the state of life, I'm trying to branch out a little bit more, but I keep getting. I guess I keep getting stuck in the fact that, okay, like yesterday, like Maui was like on fire and Portugal's on fire. And then something, I think Norway's sinking, and that we're still somehow able to not think about it or actively in Florida. Apparently they're outlawing like teaching climate change in schools. I don't know. I guess that's my obsession. I don't know. I can't write about it, but I'm just more like, how is there going to be anything else to write about but that? I guess.
Well, that is wonderful. I want to thank everybody who came here. I want to encourage you. Buy Marie's books at bookshop.org or at your favorite indie bookstore. It helps the community, it helps writers, it helps readers, it helps everybody. It really does. Also, I want to thank Marie Myung-OK for being here to talk about The Evening Hero, which it's truly one of the best books I've read this year. It's moving and quirky and funny, and it's also important. Oh, yeah, the cover. Oh my God.
It's a beautiful cover.
It's got a beautiful cover. Show it more. Look at that. It's a gorgeous cover. Gorgeous, gorgeous cover. So I will see all of you next time. And Marie, you just hang on. Here we go. See you all next time.